This is the very day. This is the very day as it's come. But hello to each and every one of you, wherever you may be. It is Foxy, and this is the day of mourning. And why that is because today marks the anniversary of my wonderful late grandfather's death, my wonderful late grandfather Edmund. Because as you all know, I think lots of you now know this off by heart already, on this day, 6 years ago, my wonderful late grandfather passed away. Sorry, I forgot to say hello. Hi, Refo. Hello. And Celestial Dances. Hubby says the music is like being at the fun fair. That's the point. Thank you to your hubby. Thank you for his observations. And Martin's in, Daddy. Lamb lunch. I've got your video. Very funny. Gordon's alive. Thank you for your condolences. It was 6 years ago today now when my wonderful late grandfather passed away. 6 years ago today. You know, only aged 73. He died nearly 8 months shy of turning 74, but he was 73 when he died. So thank you, Martin. Thank you for your condolences. Herman's here. Jody. Hi, Jody. Thank you for being so humble, as usual, Herman. Every year, the 18th of February is always a day of remembrance, mournful remembrance in ode and paid tribute to my wonderful late grandfather Edmund. Thank you, Celestial Dances, thank you. Edmund, my grandfather, was a man like no other who I could have ever known. He was what you describe, the epitome of a true gentleman, through and through. It's generally easier because the very day of his death was just completely nothing but devastating. You know, I mean, honestly, it's a day I'm never in my life going to forget. This today, 6 years ago. I mean, when my grandmother was at the time, because my grandparents moved to the Isle of Wight 5.5 years before Edmund passed away, you know, and we went over to the Isle of Wight in a great hurry, you know. But it's a bit tougher this year because I won't say why, but why it's tougher this year was because I've since overcame the loss of my wonderful late grandfather Edmund's death. I've since overcame the loss, but it did take time. I mean, I do always mourn him on the anniversary of his death and on his birthday anniversary. I always mourn him on those days, but generally it's a lot easier. Since it's done in ode and remembrance, it's a lot easier now than it was on the very year he died. And of course, the first 2 years after he died, 2021, 2022, those days, the 18th of February of those years, they were still very difficult. And it's a sad day, but it's not as burdensome as it used to be. It took until 2023 before I could open up about the death of Edmund in full. Before, in 2020, 2021, 2022, I was extremely limited with what I could share. Because if I'd shared the full story back then, I would have just been bursting in tears. I would have just been really crying. I mean, because on the day of his death, I was just really crying. I was crying my eyes out the day he passed away, you know, because as truth as it has it as it comes, grief is the price that we pay for loving our loved ones. You know, this is very true, Jody. This is very true. They say time heals all wounds eventually. Yes, it took time. It really took time because the thing was, Jody, not only after my late grandfather's death, I went through three other troubling circumstances. So all in that year, I was dealt four troubling circumstances all in a year. And after the fourth troubling circumstance, it completely, and I was grieving still at the time, I was grieving. It completely complicated the grief to the point where it just completely shattered, it greatly shattered me to the point where it changed me and it broke me for many months because of three other troubling circumstances that came within months after my grandfather passed away. And it broke me for months. I just broke after the fourth troubling circumstance. I just broke. And it was within months later, and that's when David came in. You know, and what he got me into and all that. Not only did it help with overcoming the loss of my wonderful late grandfather, but it also helped me with overcoming the severe sadness and you know, it helped me overcome the grief that got complicated. And that was, but also it helped me overcome the sadness of the troubling circumstances that followed within months after he died. But this is very true sentiment, Jody. I couldn't agree with you more. Celestial Dances. One will never forget a beloved grandparent. Eventually, you can think of them, and it doesn't hurt so much. True, it took years for me to reach this point. It took till 2023 before I reached that point. You know, it took time. It really took time. I know, and thank you, Larry Lamb Lunch, but there is also another complicated part with that on the family side. I only just realized this, but there was, yeah, but I think you know this as well, Jody, but why it's tougher this year, the anniversary of my late grandfather's death, was because of a terrible realization I learned about my grandmother. That's the one, my grandmother Anne, the one who was married to Edmund. No, that was a terrible, terrible realization I came about during 2025. My mother knew this a long, long time before me. She knew it a long time before me. You know, I couldn't say it on the live because in case my family watched this, it could probably blow up. It could blow up. I won't say why, but I've got to be very careful. No, it was subduing, Jody. When I came to that realization, it was greatly subduing. You know, it was greatly subduing when I came to that realization. Very, very subduing. You know, and I won't go into other details because it'd be very inflammatory otherwise. But yeah, you know, Daniel the Blocks Gamer. Hi, Daniel. I am in the same boat. My nan is Oh no, Daniel, your grandmother is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Oh dear, and the long goodbye is real. Where you grieve while she is still alive, and grieve and will grieve again when she goes. It's hard, I can imagine. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Refill. Thank you. Hi, Aspie. Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more because, I mean, I was devastated when Edmund passed away. I was absolutely devastated. Yes, yes, of course. No, that's why I'm not saying it in full, Pamela. So I'm not saying it in full. No, I'm not going to say why, Jodie. I will not say why. Absolutely not. So yeah. As many of you know, my late grandfather, born in 1946, which is the year he was born, which makes him a very early baby boomer. He was a boomer, my grandfather was, because it was 1946, 1964, that cohort. So, and my grandmother was 48, 1948, so both were boomers. He grew up in post-war Britain, in Woolston, in Hampshire. And I can remember one of my most favourite memories of my late grandfather was when he used to talk about because when he grew up as a little boy, he grew up near the railways, and it was at the time when British Railways was running steam and steam trains. He and my late grandfather Edmund and his late older brother Paul, having to look back for new information can be unsettling, but eventually we rearrange our thoughts and feel, yes, I completely agree. I completely agree, Pamela. No, but I will tell you why. And privately, I will tell you why it's been tougher this year, the anniversary of my grandfather's death, because of and I will tell you why about the terrible realization. Oh, I agree, yes. Rationing was 1954. 1954 was when rationing went on until 1954. So, yes, he grew up post-war Britain in Woolston in Hampshire. And Woolston, in case one of you don't know, that's near Southampton, Woolston. Thank you for your condolences, Eddie. Thank you. Normally, we don't allow under 16s, but we'll let you off this time. For this one, we'll let you off, Eddie. But the other ones, we generally don't allow under 16s. So just say, mods, please don't do anything because of what today marks. Could this be the exception for under 16s, please? Thank you. Right, just got to finish, get the story out there. He grew up in post-war Britain, in Woolston, Hampshire. Woolston is just outside of Southampton in Hampshire. And it was in the time when steam railways, it was steam engines that were running. And back when he was a little boy, he used to tell me this when when my brother and I were just little boys, whenever we went over to our grandparents' house. He used to see steam trains. He and his brother used to see the steam trains running near the back of his home garden. And he said it was all, he used to recall that with great fondness. The fondness in his voice when he spoke about it, it was just true enchantment. And he said it sadly got boring when it into the in the 1960s, because he said it was after the rise of diesels, he just stopped going out into the garden because he said it was like, well, once all these diesel electrics came in, or diesel hydraulics as well, which was namely Somerset, with a few warship diesels you had. I know what BR class it is. Just relearning it because, of course, I'm only just slowly getting back into my train watching, train smutting hobby, which was a much loved hobby of mine for a long time, but hadn't really done a lot of it. But that's another story, and that's irrelevant. But anyway, Pamela, I truly believe that you will see your grandfather again in heaven. I think it will. Yes, I know. I'm going to have to wait a long time. I don't think I'm going to go as early as 73, but I believe I'll have. Yes, I'm looking forward to when heaven comes, reunite with my grandfather. I think it will, and I hope it does. So yes, that was the first part. And then he secured work in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, whilst he was working, he went into college. He enrolled in college in 1969 to take up an architectural qualification. And his main full-time career, which starting in the 1970s, he became an architect. And he did this career, architecture, from the 1970s until he very sadly um, suffered a severe heart attack in around about 1997 when he was about 50 years of age. So he was working, always worked, and very hard as an architect until he was about 50 because of the heart attack he suffered from. A very severe heart attack he sadly suffered from, which unfortunately it required quadruple bypass surgery. Hi, Dawn Marie. Happy birthday, Dawn Marie. Happy birthday. There is something beautiful about the memory of watching steam trains pass by. I couldn't agree with you more. Certainly couldn't agree with you more. Happy birthday, darling. Hoping you're all right. And so, yes. So, what it happened, I remember hearing the story. It was in the middle of the night. He was in a lot of pain, and my grandmother actually contemplated ringing an ambulance, which was what she did. And so he was rushed into the hospital. And then that was where he found out that he had to undergo a quadruple bypass surgery. He had to the heart attack was caused as a result of over 30 years of heavy smoking 30 a day from the age of 16 up until he was 50 years of age. So he underwent the quadruple bypass surgery, which he described as one of the biggest operations you could ever experience in your lifetime. And especially because he had to undergo a quadruple bypass surgery. I mean, oh my word. I mean, oh my word, that really is that is something to undergo on an operating table. It's been rainy today, Refo, but I just need to share Edmund's story. But thank you for questioning anyway. So, yeah, it was a long time. It obviously would have taken a very long time, several hours at least. I never asked how long the bypass surgery took, but I would take a very long time if it's quadruple, and of course as severe as on his end. And but here is the very bad news. Once the surgeons finished Edmund's bypass surgery, in the aftermath of it, they accidentally damaged his esophagus. His esophagus got damaged up at the end of his bypass surgery, which left him with permanent swallowing difficulties after his the lasting side effect of his bypass surgery was permanent swallowing difficulties because of the damaged esophagus. So post-bypass surgery, eating and drinking was no longer his pleasurable enjoyment after that, to the point where he only ate. It went in actually, hear this, after his bypass surgery, because of his swallowing difficulties due to his bad esophagus, he only ate very little after that, eating as little as child-sized portions. I mean, I remember every mealtime whenever I went to my grandparents', every plate he had there was just barely any food on it. He ate much less than my grandmother, like completely less. Sometimes he even ate probably only ate about the same amount I did when I was a child, or probably less at times. He ate really quite little. Oh no, that's all. I know the surgeons all they did was their best, and that's all a doctor can do, Pamela. But it was a mistake that happened, and it was just the best they could do. But obviously, it was accidental damage that occurred after. So yeah. So yes. But I need to get to the story now. When he took up smoking, he was on his way back home from high school. Well, high school, which is college. It's difficult to watch those we love dearly struggle with health issues. It always makes me feel even my grandmother felt helpless. And he had to take medication. He was on meds daily after the heart attack. On meds daily, and the side effect of the meds he took it would cool off his body temperature, which meant he was prone to feeling the cold, you know, because of medication he took. I mean, yes, I'm prone to feeling the cold, but I don't take meds. You take care, Martin. You take care. Have a good evening. So, yeah, he was like me, prone to feeling the cold. And I really would say in a slightly different extent, really, because sometimes because he didn't button up his shirt collar in the winter, and also he was known to have his jacket mostly unzipped and his scarf not entirely wrapped up. But whereas I always zip up and do the scarf up. But yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I can remember one spring day. My grandmother was hot because she's prone to feeling the heat. She had just a dress on, nothing but a dress and sunglasses, and she actually commented on myself and Edmund's appearance. She was like, "You two," she was like, "Edmund, you and your shirt and jumper," and then she went to me, "You, your shirt, jumper, and coat," because I had my coat fully zipped up, and like, "I'm surprised you two are not hot." When I'm sick, I will sometimes wear a hat indoors. It looks silly, but it helps. I can understand why. Can understand why to keep warm if you're cold when sick. I can understand why. So yeah, yeah. But when he started smoking, it was one day he was on his way home from high school, college. I need to get to the story. Whilst he was walking in the streets of Woolston in Hampshire, a young teenager stopped him in the street and handing out a cigarette to him, he said, "Do you want a cigarette?" This is what happened. My late grandfather, he took the cigarette, smoked the cigarette, and he just became completely hooked to smoking from that day. From day one, he was completely hooked. And hear this. On his way back home, he purchased some cigarettes on his way back home and just smoked the entire packet. And then here's a very interesting story. It's a little funny, but very serious at the same time. He forged a letter to his high school, college, well, it's college in UK, but high school in the American neck of the woods. He forged a letter to his high school. And when he forged that letter, it was the letter that said, I don't want to have school, college lunches anymore. Could you stop giving me these college these cooked lunches? Because he couldn't stand the taste of the hot of the college meals. He just could not stand the taste of it. He couldn't stand the taste of the meals. And he spent all of his lunch money on cigarettes. He just skipped eating lunch entirely for the rest of his high school days. He just completely skipped his lunch eating and spent all of his lunch money, his high school, college lunch money, just all on cigarettes. That was it. Just skipped lunch. That was how hooked he was to cigarettes and how much of a heavy smoker he was. So I do feel a bit of frustration about, because of the poor health it eventually led to because of the heart attack and the bypass and the poor health it left him with for the last 20 years of his life. I feel a bit of frustration because in a way that he was a chain smoker after that one cigarette he got offered, and then that was it. A chain smoker can lead to skipping at lunch. Not eat. No, he really. He was very thin. My late grandfather. He was very, very skinny. Tell you something. He was thinner than I. I don't know. I mean, even when I knew him growing up, he was very skinny and thin. I don't know what weight he was. I know what weight he was 6 months before he died. But before he'd I know what he was 6 months before he died, but I think in the years prior to his thrombocythemia diagnosis, I don't think he was anything more than probably 125 pounds, I think, something like that. He was very thin. And as short as he was, because he was a very short man, my late grandfather, he was only about 5'4", so he was shorter than the two of us, and much shorter than Bert, and of course, your children and your parents. But very proper short. You know, he was a proper little old man, is how you'd describe him. I mean, I don't smoke at all. I've never tried. Sorry. So yeah, no, he was very thin. So yes, I mean, and he said actually, even my grandfather said, I would advise you never to smoke because it cuts your appetite. He said that about 4.5 years before he died. He said that to me. So yeah, skip lunch, completely skip lunch. Oh. So yeah, yeah. I mean, as short as he was thin. So yeah, and he remained that way for the next 30 years, to the point his appetite was cut, and he was, and very thin as a result. It was completely good advice, Pamela. Never smoke, and I've never taken it up, never tried it. You know, but think of the effect that smoking has. Because the smell of it, the smell of cigarettes, on people's bodies, and the breath most of all. It just is absolutely disgusting. If you when you come to think of it, and when you really smell it. Yes, earache is painful. Dawn Marie's giving you some good advice there, Eddie. Yes, never smoke. It's not good for anyone. True, Jody. Completely agree with you. So, yes, and he remained that way for the last 30 years to the heart attack, But, what I can say, he did. He liked reading, and he liked music. He liked classical music. And every time I went to my grandparents, when Edmund was alive, Pamela, he used to listen to a lot of Mozart. You would hear a lot of Mozart and Mendelssohn musical pieces when he was when I was a little boy. Whenever I went to my grandparents' home, he listened to a lot of Mendelssohn and Mozart, and the house was just filled with the sound of classical music. I mean, it was. Oh, these are memories that are just going to sustain me. The classical music. This is why I listen to classical music daily. I listen to it daily because of oh, I mean, it was just so. Anyway, I'm almost lost for words because it was just so wonderful, Pamela. Really, every time I went, the sound of classical music. All my life, I'm never going to forget this. It's going to truly sustain me. That when whenever the classical music was played, whenever he played it, Mozart, Mendelssohn. Sometimes I can even hear those musical pieces playing in my ears. I mean, a lifetime, I'm never going to forget this. And for a lifetime, I'll listen to classical music. So every time I went to his house, my grandparents' house, sorry, it was just filled with the sound of classical music. They say babies who listen to classical music do much better in mathematics when they get older. I did fairly well with mathematics. I did quite all right in school. Some confusion with certain mathematical technical terms, like the geometry, that sort of thing, and other stuff, isosceles, all that. But I was very good at addition, subtraction, quite or fairly good with division, and I was quite good with times tables. Don't say this boastfully, but that was just how I demonstrated the ability to it. There is nothing like classical music. They certainly do. They certainly do. I had eardrops. Yay, not antibiotics, and very picky, and I hate cough syrup. Oh, yeah, they're disgusting. I don't think he played a musical instrument. No, I don't think so. But he always listened to classical music. He always listened to music. Thank you, Marie, for honouring my grandfather, Edmund. Thank you. I know he'd be looking down proud at you. Thank you. Thank you. So, yes. So, yes, one of those memories. Wonderful, sustaining memories, that is. The sound of classical music in my grandparents' home when my grandfather was alive. He would just never tire of listening to classical music. I mean, never would he tire of it. Never. You know, he was not only was he much loved by my family, but he was also very well liked, extremely well liked by friends. Truly. You know, he never had a bad word to say about anybody. Never had a bad word. He always had something nice to say. Always. I mean, always. And he even had some fond memories of his late paternal grandparents whenever he used to see them up in County Durham. You know, one of my most favourite memories was when my grandfather, he used to take me out on a bus trip to some nice places when I was a child. And also another one of my favourite memories with my grandfather was when he used to have a camper van. I need to really share this. My late grandfather, in about 2011, no, it was 2011, sorry, it was 2011, he purchased a camper van, an old 1980s Volkswagen camper van, which he and my grandmother had it from 2011 until 2015. My grandmother doesn't drive, she never learned to drive, so he did all the driving. And those were another one of my most favourite memories, the camper van. Riding in his camper van was fun. It was an automatic camper van. It had an automatic gearbox. And I can remember, and it really would have gone well at a classic concert. Sorry, I'm literally doing a tribute. What's going on?
Oh, sorry. Have you seen my appetizer? Have you drank it?
I don't know. So yeah, he had a camper van, Volks. I can still picture the camper van now. I can even picture the sound of it. And he used to drive. Sometimes he would drive the camper van to Shoreham Fort. I liked him to Shoreham Fort. He would drive along the seafront from Port Slade in Brighton Hove when he and my grandmother lived there from 2008 until 2014. Along the seafront we'd go, overlooking the picturesque view of the seafront. We'd park up, get a beautiful scenery on a nice day of the beach and the Hulk. I never went camping in his camper van, no, but I have been camping with friends my own age and with their parents, yes. But I never went camping in his camper van, no. Hiking in the woods, I think I did a long time ago at one point. But yeah, but I never camped in his camper van though, no. But you know, those were really, truly sustaining memories. Going to Shoreham Fort from Port Said in his camper van, and as well as going on the bus with him or my grandmother to Shoreham or to Worthing or anywhere nice. And also one of my most favourite memories was back in April 2013 when I was then aged 11, almost 12, and he was then aged 66 going on 67. he took me to his hometown of Woolston, and I went, which was the first time I'd ever gone to Woolston, in 2013, that April. My grandmother was in Chile because my auntie had just given birth to one of my younger cousins, so my grandmother wasn't there for us, wasn't there with us, unfortunately. But and of course I know, and then this was a long, long time before the terrible realization I'd learned of my grandmother. It was by this point my mother had already known about it by this point. And my mother wasn't talking to my grandmother by 2013, but I won't say why. And he took me to his childhood hometown where he grew up in. And that's another one of my favorite memories of my late grandfather. But mostly, whenever I saw him, we'd do bus trips together, go in his camper van, and even on the Isle of Wight. And after he moved to the Isle, he and my grandmother moved to the Isle of Wight in the summer of 2014. We used to go. We did a lot of walks around Shanklin together, my grandfather and I. We'd walk along Shanklin seafront, go up a little alleyway, and walk back through Shanklin town, and it was a long walk. We did. I mean, despite his poor health, he was a very good and very active long walker. He was a very good walker, my grandfather, a completely good walker. I mean, extremely good walker in every way. And he continued actively walking until 7 months. That was until 7 months before he died. No, and I will get to this a bit later. But he was an active walker up until the age of 72. That was because he was almost 74. Well, he was 73 when he died. He was an active walker up until 72. And I always loved joining in with the walks he used to do, whether it was myself and him or him and my grandmother. And another thing we used to do together a lot, whenever going to the Isle of Wight, was we used to go to the Isle of Wight steam railway together. So that's another one of the things we used to do together. And that is a truly valuable memory I've got. Because whenever I went out, because my grandmother, up until my grandfather passed away, she stopped doing it after he died. She volunteered at a charity shop. And even when I came over, she was volunteering at the charity shop. So when on the day she volunteered at the charity shop, he would take me to the Isle of Wight steam railway. Always were they wonderful. That's just the most wonderful memories. Riding on the steam trains, smelling the steam, watching the steam trains. We just had a ball. We just have a ball doing it. We just had a ball. The Falcon, yes, when those Falcons they had. I remember the Falcons back in the 2010s. They had the Falcons. It's been a very long. I haven't been. It's been a very, very long time since I've been to the Isle of Wight steam railway. I haven't been since the last time. I haven't been since the second last time I went to the Isle of Wight. So it's been a very, very long time. But it's been a long time. So when I go to the Isle of Wight next, I'm going to make it a point to go on my own. Or if I'm going, say, if I'm lucky enough to have a girl at this point, I'll take her with me. No, I'd recommend the Isle of Wight. No, wait a minute, Pamela, wait a minute. You take care, Aspie. Can't wait till I go to Canada. You have a nice time in Toronto, Canada, Yvonne. This is just a correction for Pamela. She got Isle of Wight. She got the wording wrong for Isle of Wight. She got the wording wrong by mistake. No, we really did like the steam trains. I mean, I love steam trains. I love a lot of trains. Certainly steam. And we just had a ball, my grandfather and I, going to the Isle of Wight steam railway, a real ball. And sometimes after the Isle of Wight steam railway, we used to get the bus into Newport, spend some time in Newport, and then just come back home and have our dinner. You know, and then on a bridge night, and he didn't go out to bridge in the night. My grandmother did. My grandmother went out to bridge, and when she went out to bridge, she did bridge until he died. It was all on up until my grandfather died. She did bridge and charity shop volunteering, but then she just packed it all in. Once after he passed away, she completely packed it in. You know. So yeah, as you can imagine. So yes. So on a bridge night, when my grandmother was out playing bridge, we just did our own thing. And another thing that was impressive about my grandfather was he kept his brain sharp by being a vividly strong reader, and he did crossword puzzles and Sudoku. So that also kept his memory intact, even into his later years. So he had he had a great deal of mental vitality despite poor health, and was very mentally sharp and alert right up until he died. Still had mental alertness and good arithmetic until he died. No, it's all right, Pat Muller. We all make mistakes. Oh, he just never tired of seeing steam engines, Eddie. My late grandfather never tired of seeing steam engines. He never tired of it. So yes, I thought because Pamela wanted to know what I did with my grandfather. I did a lot of bus trips with him whenever I went to my grandparents, and that was certainly when they were in Brighton Hove before they moved to the Isle of Wight. Because I saw more of my grandparents when they lived in the Brighton and Hove Port Slade, in the Brighton and Hove regions, and but I didn't see them as much once they moved to the Isle of Wight. But every school and college, high school holiday, up until I was 18, I went every school holiday. Almost every school holiday, I went to the Isle of Wight to see them. So I spent a lot of time on the Isle of Wight during when I was a teenager, and so during much of my youth, I spent a lot of time on the Isle of Wight every school holiday, and those memories sustain me completely. And I think it's sort of in a way, even though I did go through a scandalous incident when I was almost 14. I'm not going to say what it is online. It largely it kept me out of trouble. Kept me out of trouble going to the Isle of Wight during the school holidays. It completely kept me out of trouble. It really did largely keep me out of trouble. And I used to always, whenever before the school holiday was out, I used to get all really excited and tell all my peers, I'm going to see my grandparents on the Isle of Wight. And then whenever we come back to school from the holiday, it would be before, it was a long time before I left. Saw my grandparents, and I did this, we did that. Honestly, I mean, that doesn't sustain me truly. A lot of nice bus trips I did with him, interesting ones. Isle of Wight steam railway, going in his camper van until sadly, he had to scrap the camper van because it kept breaking down. In about the last year of its life, it kept breaking down to the point where eventually we do walks in parks, walks along seafront. We would do walks anywhere, and we walked around a lot of Woolston, Edmund and I, when we first went back in 2013. We did a lot of walks there. We would do walks anywhere, my grandfather and I. I mean, my grandmother and I did walks together too. You know. So those were perfectly sustaining memories. You know. All those memories, bus trips, camper van, riding in his camper van, steam railways, nice, pleasurable walks. They're going to sustain me for life. They're going to completely sustain me for life. But very sadly, the last 2.5, nearly 3 years of his life, after turning 70, his health went downhill. I mean, he was, by the age of 70, he became frail. Edmund did. He was he was aging. He showed signs of increased aging and frailty after his 70th birthday. He was 70 years old and looking about, I would say, and looking 83. Because he'd visibly lost weight. He was why he was frail, because he was noticeably thinner. I mean, I've got a picture of him and my grandmother, from April 2017, and when we went to Yarmouth Castle, to Yarmouth, Isle of Wight. He was visibly thinner and noticeably frailer. I mean, he managed to do the long walk. He was still able to manage long walks. Luckily, at this point, it hadn't got to the point where he was no longer able to manage long walks. I don't know what weight he was, but he was probably about 118 pounds by April 2017. I've been to Black Gang Chine. I have been there. I'm going to hopefully go again when I go to the Isle of Wight. Both she and my grandmother looked forward to seeing me during the school holidays. No, they both did. They genuinely both did. They genuinely did. So yes. So yes, but it was only the following year in 2018, because actually I was going to spend New Year of 2017 with my grandparents, I remember, but my grandmother, it was actually going to be myself and my aunt who were going to go over to the Isle of Wight for to stay over with them for the New Year 2017, and of course for New Year 2019. But my grandmother forbade it. And why she forbade it? Because of concerns about his increasing frailty and his health concerns. Hello, darling. Hi, Queen Bee. And actually, and then when I saw Edmund again that following spring of 2018, I could see why she forbade my auntie and I from going over, spending the New Year with them, because he was showing increased signs of frailty. He went from he was age 70 and looking 83, and then after turning, he was 71, and then starts looking about 88. He'd aged about 5 years in a year, and showing increased frailty again within a year, at only 71, nearly 72. And then 19 months, this is when it became official, and that was when we officially found out there was something really quite genuinely wrong with him, on top of his bad heart, post-heart attack. In July of 2018, my late grandfather, he was diagnosed with something called thrombocythemia. Thrombocythemia is very rarely spoken about. It's a type of blood cancer where you have, when you need to have a certain number of platelets and red blood cells. My late grandfather, he had double the number that he needed, and he had to take medication for that. And sadly, it's incurable. There's no cure for thrombocythemia, but you can take medication to stop it getting worse. But the medication had a profound side effect than the condition itself. It was the medication that really actually affected him more than the thrombocythemia. If not, over time, it actually worsened the thrombocythemia. And here, this 19 months before he died. Actually, that was when his weight, we found out what his weight was. He was at 5'4" of height. He used to be 5'5", but when he got to about late 50s, early 60s, not so much due to old age, but largely due to poor health, and because of with the bad heart, he didn't have a lot of strength. You know, he didn't have a lot of strength in his later years, particularly after the heart attack, where he'd shrunken in height. You know, he didn't have a lot of strength in him, unfortunately, especially as thin as he was. You know, because he was 5'5", but he was 5'4". You know, he was as short as David, because David's 5'4.5", and he's not lost any height yet at his age. You know, with David, he's generally more fit. That is, you know, as many of you know. It became official what his weight was. He was 5'4" and weighing only 114 pounds. 19 months before his death, he was 114 pounds at 5'4" of height. I mean, can you imagine that? And that's probably less than what my grandmother is today. I mean, she's even shorter at 5'2". She's another very short lady who was actually quite overweight at one point, who actually, hear this, until she was 74, from about, until when she was about 66, I think it was, from about age 66 until she was 74, she was probably about, and 5'2", she was probably about 164 pounds. She was about 164, 168 pounds, something like that. So, which is actually quite fairly large for a lady her height. Sorry, if there's anybody who is my grandmother's height and does weigh more than that, I'm extremely sorry if I'd offended. I was not trying to body shame, I'm just sharing. So she was overweight at one point, but then she lost a lot of weight. After 74, she lost a lot of weight, going down to about, probably 130, 132 pounds, something like that. She genuinely thinned out. Hello, Mrs. Parker. Hello, darling. Hello to your husband, Mr. Parker. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, hello to you. My grandfather was a very handsome man. He was nice looking, had a nice face, and wonderful eyes. He had wonderful, wonderful eyes. He had a very nice, bright hazel eyes, what he had. Bright hazel eyes that really represented kindness and warmth. Even just looking into his bright hazel eyes was just enough to tell that they just represented kindness and warmth. I mean, he had wonderful hazel eyes. He had eyes similar to Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford's got hazel eyes, but the only difference was his was much more, he had more sparkle to it. He has brightness to his hazel eyes, Harrison Ford, yes. But Edmund, he had both brightness to it, like that of Harrison Ford, but he had more sparkles. He had much more stamina and sparkles to his bright hazel eyes than that of Harrison Ford. You know, really proper warmth in his bright hazel eyes, looking into them. Even looking back now, I get goosebumps from it. And they're going to sustain me always. Always will that sustain me. Do have a good work day, darling. Do have a good work day. Take care, lovely Mrs. Parker. Take care. Mrs. Parker, she's followed me quite a while, Queen Bee. Just to let you know, she's followed me quite a while. I've been hearing from Mrs. Parker on and off, since about 2024, something like that. So it's been a while since I've known Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Just to say, Gil is Mrs. Parker's husband. That's Mrs. Parker. Gil's the husband, Mr. Gil Parker. But thank you, Celestial Dancers, for your kindness towards Mrs. Parker. Thank you. No, really, yeah. Something I'm never going to forget. His lovely hazel eyes. you know. No, but after his thrombocythemia diagnosis, and when he started, by this point, he was undertaking medication. He not only was he looking visibly thin, he was definitely looking thinner than he was in 2017. Because I came over that August 2018, 2 months shy of his 72nd birthday, because I'd arrived at the Isle of Wight, and because he'd gone out for a walk, because I was about 5 minutes settling into my grandparents' house, and he walked into the living room. He walked in smiling, and as soon as I said hello, but then my jaw just dropped. I was like, and he just looked at me for about a couple of minutes. He was like, is anything all right? And then my face was no longer frozen. And I was like, oh my goodness, Edmund. I was like, oh my goodness, Edmund. I was like, are you okay? The moment I saw that level of frailty, and he was visibly aged, like he'd aged again within 4 months. He went from looking 88, he was April 2018, 71 and a half, and looking about 88, to now 2 months shy of turning 72 and looking 95. I mean, I personally thought he looked about 95 instead of almost 72. I mean, he was visibly aged. The medication and the thrombocythemia, well, the medication, and again, the weight loss, it visibly aged him. It visibly aged him. He'd aged within months. And I was concerned. Really, I was concerned. And he was like, oh, I'm okay. I was like, but did you have a nice walk? That sort of thing, you know? And then he went about, did his own thing. And then I walked to find my grandmother. And I walked there, saw my grandmother reclining in the bedroom. I stood and I sighed, took a deep breath, and I was like, I can't believe it. I was like, I can't believe it. And she's like, you can't believe what? I was like, he's aged. I was like, Edmund has aged so visibly. Like he very visibly aged him. I did, yes. I did. That was what he preferred. He preferred it if we'd called him Edmund. That was what he preferred. And there's a long story behind it. It's a long story behind it. Oh, hello. Hello. I do remember his hands, yes. Actually, as thin as he was and as short as he was, he actually had bigger hands than what I had. Mine are just nothing but complete dainty hands. Small, even if I clenched a fist. Tiny as anything. His were actually bigger than mine. And certainly bigger than my mother's. His was bigger than his mother's. His hands were certainly bigger than my mother's, because my mother's got even smaller hands than what I've got. Hers are even more dainty than mine. And even my grandmother's got bigger hands than what I've got. I mean, his fingers were round about slightly longer in length and certainly bigger in texture. Same with my grandmother's, a bit longer and certainly bigger in texture. Sorry about your cold. Sorry about your cold. Felt rough for 2 days. Oh, awful. So yes, he had reasonably average size hands. Mine are smaller than average. You know, I mean, I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I really couldn't believe what I'd seen, and seeing how he'd visibly aged after the thrombocythemia. And now you get to the next following year, the next summer 2019. You know, he completely deteriorated. At this point, the thrombocythemia, it took such a toll to his health. It got to the point where he could no longer do long walks. He was just about driving, but he gave up driving after his what was his final 73rd birthday in October 2019. You know, he could no longer do long walks. He could only walk to the bus stop and back from his and my grandmother's home, and the bus stop was probably about, I don't think it could have been any further than 100 yards from the house. That was how far he could walk in his last few years. He could no longer do the long walks along Shanklin Seafront. He could only walk to the bus stop and back, get a bus, because the bus stop, it was only probably like no further than 100 yards from the house, so very, very limited with walking. He didn't have a walking stick or anything, luckily. He was able to walk just about walking unaided, but he could, but he could no longer do the long walks at this point. 2 months shy of turning 73, 6 months before he died, he could no longer do the long walks. And I was really, and he'd aged really very visibly again. He was very visibly aged, and he was not just frail, but he was looking increasingly decrepit 6 months before he died. And it was at that point, it was at this point where I just knew he was not gonna survive many more years. And again, he'd lost weight again, and he was just very physically limited. He was much more limited, and I could remember talking to him. 6 months. I was sad. I did the Shanklin walk all on my own. I did it all on my own, the Shanklin walk. Because he could no longer do it at this point. And I actually said to my grandfather, I said, how does it feel not being able to do a long walk? And I remember him saying, oh, he was like, he wasn't angry. He said, I'm just pissed off with getting old, and when it gets really bad, I'll be ready to bite the bullet and go. I remember him saying that. He said it very quietly and peacefully. I mean, he was still talking. You could still talk to him at this point, luckily. But he was only 72. That's only 72, and he could only walk about 100 yards and back. Nearly 73. I mean, my grandmother can walk. She was still able to walk further than that, even at 75. Even at 74, 75, she was able to walk further than 100 yards. And even when my grandmother was 73, she was able to walk much further than 100 yards. Tell you something. But yes, we do eventually slow down, but as early as 72. But his was under health circumstances. Not so much age, but it was under health circumstances, Pamela. I know, yes, we never know how much time we have. I know, yes. He very much liked Mozart. He used to listen to Mozart piano concerto. He used to listen to that a lot. Piano concerto. I know, yes, this is very true, Pamela. Yeah, Jody, yes. Hi, Specs. His happened at a much earlier point, much earlier than you'd typically expect. Everybody's different. I know that, but in your early 70s. But he was in poor health anyway, over 20 years. But the thrombocythemia, it exacerbated his poor health. So yes, he'd lost weight, visibly slowed down. The medication, it just took such a toll. It completely took a toll on his health. The thrombocythemia medication. And I don't know, but hear this, Pamela, and all of you. 6 months before my grandfather passed away, he only weighed as little as 106 pounds. 6 months before he died, he weighed as little as 106 pounds. 100. Oh, I'm. Oh God, sorry. I mean, can you imagine that on an almost 73-year-old man? And he'd visibly shrunken again at this point. And I don't know how he was certainly not 5'4", 6 months before he died. By this point, he was probably, I think he was probably more 5'3" at this point, 6 months before he died. 5'3", 5'3.5", something like that. So he was about, which is Jodie's height, 5'3". So he was probably about Jodie's height, 6 months before he died, and he'd visibly lost weight. It wasn't as a result. Yeah, yes. Well, you were 100 pounds at one point, but luckily it wasn't through illness. His was through poor health and illness. He was completely eating less, and actually, he was skipping breakfast at this point. He was completely skipping lunch. The only thing he would eat was only dessert. He would only got to the point where all he could eat was nothing but smaller than child portions, or probably like a small dessert, like a crumble, or just ice cream, or probably like one piece of meat, something like that. In the last months of his life, he completely an exceptionally reduced appetite, completely limited with his walking distance, very frail at this point, and increasingly decrepit. He was lovely. My grandfather was just lovely. Your grandmother's been gone 18 years. No, I know. Yes, it wasn't smoking this time. It was thrombocythemia, and the medication that just completely took its toll on his health. I think it was getting to the point. Your grandmother had lung cancer. She wasn't hungry at all in the last 3 weeks of his life. At the end, my aunt ate both, but York peppermint patties. The doctor said to give her what she wants. Okay. No, no, and he went, and in a year, and within a year, he looked 10 years older. He was the previous year, August 2018, 2 months shy of turning 72 and looking 95, to now August 2019, 2 months shy of turning 73 and looking 105. He looked old looking, he was looking much more, he looked old enough to be my parents' grandfather, looking old enough to be my grandmother's father. My grandmother also was visibly aged at this point too, due to the stress and concern for his health. And she's looked older than her age. She did look slightly better by the time she was 73, but but uh, but she was then 71 and looking 10 years older than her age due to the stress. The stress aged her so visibly. I mean, I could see how visible the stress and concern was for his health when it got to the point where his health was really, where he was in very fragile stage. I mean, but his was through poor health, looking in his hundreds, in his early 70s, which actually, and this was only a year later. I mean, he had shrunk so visibly, and he'd lost so much weight, and he'd aged so much, which actually clearly showed he was so desperately ill with thrombocythemia. But the good thing was he fought it. He fought the illness resiliently with such brave courage and conviction. And he didn't complain. He never complained. And I thought I was going to do many things on my own when staying over. But what was amazing was, this was just months before he stopped driving. He drove to the Isle of Wight steam railway. And he just about managed to get through the Isle of Wight steam railway, but we didn't do a lot. All we did was we just did the train. We rode on the steam train. And then, and once we came back, we had a bite to eat. He hardly ate anything. I had a bite to eat for lunch. And then we just went in the car and drove back home. No, I do remember him in the good times, I really do. When I remember my grandfather, most memories I have is picturing him when when he wasn't increasingly frail and decrepit. I picture him, yes, he was in poor health, but had better mobility when I picture him with the memories I've got of him of better mobility and when we were able to do a lot. Hi, Mandy. Hello, hoping you're okay. So, yes, I didn't think he'd go as soon as 6 months when I saw just how frail he got and how much he'd lost weight and how much he'd visibly aged at this point. You know, I didn't think he'd die within 6 months, but you just don't know, do you? But and but I actually thought he'd probably. I would have thought. I remember talking to my mother during the summer of 2019, and I was like, I think summer of next year. I think that's going to be his last summer. I mean, and I can remember the months before he died. I was like, I don't think he's got very. I was like, I don't think my grandfather's got very long left. So I think I'd like to spend one last spring and summer, with him before he goes. He did. He said a lot of his childhood stories, and one of the most funniest stories he had in childhood, and it's very strange and obscure. This primary school he went to was he had to wear a scruffy uniform and caps that had to be all dirty and scruffy. And that was quite funny when I heard that. And if you lost your caps, you'd get into serious trouble. At the school they had a very obscure dress code policy. Scruffy uniforms and scruffy caps. You take care, Refill. You take care. I mean, what an obscure school dress code policy. Scruffy uniforms, scruffy caps. I can't ever imagine wearing that seeing that as a dress code policy in my school. It'll probably be that dress code policy when I have children, but back in the 1950s Britain, when normally dress codes were generally a lot more stricter and smarter, a dress code where you have to wear uniforms that's all dirty and scruffy caps. Oh my word. Those are memories of his childhood I'm never going to forget. I'll always remember him telling me those stories. Oh my word. Oh my word. So, yeah. So, yes, I could remember months before he died. I was like, I don't think he's got long left, my grandfather. And so, yes. But then the month later, 18th of February, 2020, in the early hours of the 18th of February, 2020, was when we'd found out that my grandfather had passed away. Well, he'd passed away, but we found out within a few hours later. And once the news broke out, because my father broke the news out to my brother and I, he came to pick my brother and I up to take to the Isle of Wight to see my grandmother. Once I heard the news, that was it. I just broke. I just completely broke down in tears. I was crying my eyes out the day I found out he died. I was completely crying my eyes out. And even when my mother found out, because I remember my mother rang me whilst we were on the way to the Isle of Wight in the car. And I remember I just broke down. I just completely broke down crying. I was absolutely devastated. And all of the family was devastated. Even my father was devastated because I heard him crying when he broke the news out about Edmund's death. No, I was absolutely devastated. I was absolutely devastated when once he kicked the bucket. And when we saw my grandmother obviously looking completely and heavily subdued, you know. We spent the night in the Isle of Wight, and then my aunt came over, and also my aunt rang to say she was on the way with her then ex-partner, um, which was about 2 years before they separated. Hello, Maureen. Yes, I remember hearing about the death of your sister. Yes, and it's just heavily traumatized you since then, to the point of being agoraphobic. I know. Remember hearing the stories. I doubt I'll ever. One thing I could recommend, if it is significantly impacting daily life, Maureen, the death of your sister, and if you're still struggling with it, could I recommend therapy to you? Because maybe try undergoing a talking therapy, because that could prove very beneficial and that could do you wonders. Undergoing a talking therapy, because that could help, Maureen. That could certainly help. The talking therapy could really help if you undergo it. The death of your sister that's heavily traumatized you. Might I recommend undergoing a talking therapy, darling? So yeah, I just completely broke down on that day. And I didn't want to spend very long on the Isle of Wight. Yes, thank you for recommending it, Queen Bee. That could really help lovely Maureen, especially since it's got to the point where it significantly impacted her daily, impacting her life to that extent. You know, I mean, Maureen's got a very good life ahead, and spending the last years of it just crippled with grief and with agoraphobic tendencies. That's the worst way to live your last years. That's the worst way to live. Because life is for living. Life is truly for living, and it's not for wasting away. It's really not. You know, so but it was the next day. It was the next day after he died. That was when I inherited his clothes. I took his clothes. I tried his clothes on. They fit perfectly. I took his clothes and his jumpers. Sadly, some jumpers I could not keep long term because they got holes in them. So I sadly had to get rid of some because of holes. And that devastated me. That upset me because I didn't know about my tailor, or about any tailoring until for about a few years, until a good few years later. So I took home whatever jumpers of his I could, and I've got most of his shirts. I took home whatever shirts I could, and I even took home his blazers. I took home his suit jacket blazers, a lot of his shirts, and his jumpers. And this is my grandfather's jumper that I'm wearing. That is his jumper. I'm wearing his jumper. And I know the person who accused me of wearing his so-called dead clothes. He didn't wear this when he died. He wore a pair of pajamas and a dressing gown when he died. So the person, I know who this was who said that I wear his dead clothes. Do you know what I'd say to him? Fuck you. I actually was very hurt when he said that. Very hurt when he said that. And had he said that to me just after he died, that I now wear his so-called dead clothes, oh my goodness, it would not go well. Really, it wouldn't. I'm not going to say who it is. I know who said it. I'll tell you who it was who said it, Jody. And I mean, if he'd said that to me when my grandfather had just died, I couldn't tell you how much it would really upset me, but for someone to say that to me, that actually angers me. It really angers me. The person who said that I wear his so-called dead clothes, fuck you. I'd say that. Sorry about the language, but I was really hurt by that. Extremely hurt. And especially when he said that I'd try and challenge or channel my deceased grandfather. Fuck you. Anyway, moving on from that. So yes, the day he died, no, the next day after his death, I inherited his clothes. I inherited his clothes and whatever jumpers I could, and his blazers and his blazer suit jackets. Took them I took bags of them home, and I've got them to this day, and I wear them on and off to this day. And I'm happy I took them with me, because I think they would have probably been destroyed or gone to charity if I didn't take them home with me. And I'm so glad they fit me. I'm really glad they fit me. I mean, if anything, I actually think they look too big on my grandfather. But what I could not inherit, however, were his trousers, because they were too short in the leg. His trousers were too short in the leg for me. So I couldn't inherit his trousers. And also, I could never inherit his shoes. Because hear this, my late grandfather, he had a smaller shoe size or foot size than what I had. My feet were bigger than his, so I never got to inherit his shoes, which was disappointing, and I never got to inherit his trousers, which was also disappointing. But yes, there's absolutely no such thing as dead clothes. Fuck the person who said that. Fuck you. And you're probably going to retaliate at me if you watch this, or you'll probably get your lurkers to watch this. Yeah. But that slowing down and ending lets you have last conversations and to say goodbye. I have my grandmother's chinas. I love using it and thinking about it. About how it adorned her table once upon a time. The clothes Edmund wore completely suited him. This completely suited him. No, I mean, it's too hot for the summer, this one, but it's good in the fall, winter, and spring, this one. Oh, hi, Marie. Hello to you. I have a pillow made from my grandfather's shirts. You know. Hi, Andrea. Hello, darling. So, yes, I consider myself, I would never mean to say it arrogantly, but I do not take for granted ever being able to inherit and being able to fit into wearing my late grandfather's clothes, the ones I was able to inherit. I completely do not take it for granted. And I wear this in appreciation. I always, whenever I'm wearing my grandfather's clothes, fuck the idiots who say that I wear his so-called claimed dead clothes. Fuck you, the person who said it. That's another story. I always wear them with pride and appreciation. Always. Always do I wear them with pride and appreciation. No, really, always with pride and appreciation do I wear his clothes. Always. I know it's you, Leah. Don't worry. I'm sorry about the mistakes I made about you, about your name. See you wearing his things. I think he would. I think he'd be looking down, smiling at me. So yes. And I remember the next day I came home, bags of his clothes I inherited, his blazer suit jackets, the jumpers I was able to inherit, and his shirts I was able to inherit. Sadly, not the trousers or the shoes, because he was a size 7 UK shoe size, which is an 8 American size for men's. Whereas I, on the other hand, I'm a size 8 UK or a 9 American men's. So my feet, I was only one size bigger. My feet's one size bigger than what his was, just to say. So he, you take into account his height, and not just that, also his size, weight-wise, it would have made sense. It generally would have made sense. So yes, so that was why I couldn't. Oh, hi, Maxa. Hello. I inherited my grandfather's suits. He traveled a lot and had many of his suits tailored for him overseas. Fortunately for him, we were of similar size. I could have never afforded them otherwise. No, I don't. I don't let them get me down. They're just making fools of themselves. People say that. But thank you, Pamela. Thank you. Oh, hello, Anne. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. I mean, well, you're 6'4" of height, aren't you? Yes, and you've got a 6'8" and 6'2" son. I mean, and is your wife is tall, isn't she? I mean, how tall is your wife, if you don't mind me asking? But I think you said she's taller than me. I mean, I'm 5'8", as you know. Well, all of you probably know this off by heart by now. Edmund, when he was younger, until he was in his 50s, about 60, he was 5'5". You're talking a short man, Maxa. He was a short man of 5'5", but in his later years he shrunk down to 5'4". But before he died, I don't think he was any taller than 5'3", 5'3.5". In the last months of his life, he'd shrunk quite a lot, visibly. Do like a man in a suit. I've got a grey suit. I've got a full suit, and I love the way I look in my grandfather's blazers. She's a tad over 5. Oh, so she's just taller than me. Okay. A tad over 5'8". Okay. Aren't they just, Andrea? Aren't they just? A lot of his clothes are Marks and Spencers, just to say. And I do like Marks and Spencers. Really, I do. This is an old Marks and Spencers jumper. I mean, actually, hear this. My grandmother bought his clothes for him because he was generally very scruffy. He was generally had a reputation for dressing scruffily. So she bought his clothes for him. I'll tell you that. She wasn't going to have a scruffy husband. No. But yes, yeah. And I can remember the next day, and once I put his clothes away, I went over to my mother, and I spoke about how my grandmother was and how we were. This was before I realised who This was before the terrible realisation I learned. 5 years before the terrible realisation I learned of my grandmother. No, but unfortunately, Andrea, I did almost a year ago, during 2025, which was the year we first knew each other. I learned of there was a terrible realization I learned of my grandmother, but I won't say what it is on the live. I mean, and it really was subduing, very subduing. I still have a jar of my grandmother's Pond's face cream. She died in 2011, just can't throw it away. That's very nice, Leah. Well done. She must have lived into old age. She must have been very old when she died. So, so then my mother and I talked, and we talked. And then once I finished talking, I just burst into tears. And that was after then, I had good days and bad days, because that was the period of grief. And that was when the period of grief started. And actually, I was going to do a rail train spotting outing that weekend, but I didn't do it. I just didn't have the motivated incentive. I was just too upset. I mean, even if I did go out shortly after my grandfather died, whatever I did, or no matter what I did, I just couldn't find any pleasurable enjoyment. I hardly found any pleasurable enjoyment. I was too upset. I mean, I went over to the Isle of Wight in March to spend a few days before the funeral to keep my grandmother company, but we just hardly had any incentive to do anything, And then it was just after my grandfather's funeral, I went back to my internship because I was doing an internship at the time, Then we had my grandfather's funeral, but then very sadly, then we had COVID, which didn't help with the grief, you know. And then within months after my grandfather passed away, I was dealing with mistreatment because of the COVID disruption of my internship course I was doing. And it was through no fault of my own. I had no control of that. And I got a lot of mistreatment for it because it didn't turn into a job that it was meant to, because it was meant to turn into a job afterwards. And then I had a foot injury, an accident, you know, so I had to go to A&E, and I was wheeled around in a wheelchair, and no one could keep me company in the waiting room, you know, due to COVID at the time. So I was wheeled around in a wheelchair by nursing staff, and that took weeks to heal. And then the biggest blow got met when I least expected it. It was completely unexpected. The fourth thing, that was pretty much the final straw. The internship course, because we had a third, and what was the unknowingly final lockdown that lasted for about 4 months. Well, it was about 7 months in total, but it began to steadily end after about 4 months. It put an end to the internship course, completely put an end to the internship course. So at this point, alongside a prolonged grief, so now I was dealing with a prolonged, so there was my grandfather's death, mistreatment, completely uncalled for, unwarranted mistreatment, and a foot injury that was very frightening and certainly frightening. And then I lost an internship course, and then I lost a job opportunity because the internship course was on the rocks, you know. And all those 4 troubling circumstances, it just piled on one thing after the other, just completely piled up, which to the point where it complicated the grief I was suffering from due to my grandfather's death. It completely complicated the grief to the point where emotionally and greatly shattered me, to the point where it changed me and it broke me. And this lasted many months. It broke me to the point where I took up increased drinking, and I was increasingly a recluse. I had very, very few good days. I mean, there were some good days, but they were very, very few and far between. It didn't matter if COVID lockdown was over. I was just shattered emotionally because of my 4 troubling circumstances that completely complicated the grief. It completely complicated it. And this lasted for months. But then something wonderful happened. Right at the end of COVID lockdown, I mean, I hardly had any incentive. The only thing I just about had the incentive to do was go to my local fun thing and a known bus rally I was known to go to. So I went to that, and with the COVID at the time, I was quite careful. So I was cautious and careful because I was concerned of it at the time. I was dead concerned, and especially I'm lacking a second vaccination then. I was just not going to take a lot of chances. There was just no way I was going to take a lot of chances. Really, it wasn't. And it was at the end of Worthing Bus Rally, something wonderful happened. That's when I met David. That was when I met David. And that's when the stories, and then I'll share the full story. I'll share the full story. Really, I will share it. In July of this year, I'm going to share the full story of what it means to me having a best friend like David. So then I met David at the end of Worthing Bus Rally. Because before, if you were to try and talk to me about something, depended what it was, sometimes I could get quite snappy, and if not, sometimes I used to get very angry if you were to talk about some things to me because of what I was dealing with and going through, and certainly snappy in an increased way. But then when I met David, something just won me over. It won me over when I was talking to him. We talked, something won me over, you know. And then he recommended, and that was when, after we met, he recommended the Steam Rally events and the events that I'm now known to go to this day. Within 2 weeks after David and I first met, I mean, I wasn't so sure. I was actually, if not very apprehensive about going. It was Tinker's Park Rally, with the prolonged grief and suffering sadness due to the emotional toll it took from suffering mistreatment that was completely uncalled for, and the side effect of emotional side effect of the foot injury, and a real emotional side effect of the internship course that was on the rocks. That was meant to turn into a job opportunity that just went completely on the rocks. Completely derailed and on the rocks to the point where it never started again. And because of all those circumstances I was I'd only just gone through and was dealing with, I was just, and of course with concerns regarding COVID at the time, I was just really not sure if I was to go to Tinker's Park. I just didn't know if I was going to go. I was apprehensive. But this time, if you were to recommend a nice event to me, I would have gotten very angry and snappy and would have just said no to it. But after when I met David, it was when something won me over. I didn't completely reject the idea, but I took much more thoughtful consideration to it. But obviously, it was not met without apprehension. It just took a lot more thinking. But as the days drew nearer and nearer, I thought about it and thought about it. And then it was when the day came, I decided, okay, I'll go. Quite reluctantly. So I reluctantly took the bull by the horns, went to Tinker's Park, and that was when I was met. That was when I will share the full story. I will share the full story. And it was after the Tinker's Park event was over. And it was after that the Tinker's Park event was over. I'd been going annually ever since then. I've now gone to Tinker's Park annually ever since. And I was really pleased with the result because I was just so pleased with the result, and it was nice, because of all we'd gone through a lot at this point. Certainly I had gone through a lot. Myself and my family had gone through a lot, especially with the loss of Edmund. And then, of course, it was COVID after that, so it was a lot, and then other troubling circumstances, so so after the Tinker's Park rally, I gave up the excess binge drinking. I gave up the binge because I actually took increased drinking after the internship. I didn't take to drinking when my grandfather died. No, I would never have done that. But because there were after the fourth troubling circumstance that complicated the grief, and unable to find any other way to find happiness, the drinking, one's going to ask, why did you take increased drinking? At the time, it was a comfort for me. And I just consider myself one of those lucky men that came out the other end. And actually, I did give up the increased drinking after Tinker's Park, and I only went back to how I normally drink alcohol, which was moderately and in moderation, rather than to excess, and cleaned up the diet to how it is now. Dusted myself off, and I checked the website link he sent me, which showed a lot of events like bus rallies, that sort of thing. I looked at it and I read it. And then there was another event that was due to take the following Sunday after Tinker's Park. And I thought, okay, right, now that's where I need to go. So slowly but surely, I steadily began to heal from the wounds. I did not heal all at once. It took time. I still had bad days, but they became less noticeable over time. And it was only by early 2023 I was healed. I felt emotionally healed by this point. It took time. But I was met with the healing. Ever since David came into my life, even though that's another story for July of 2026, ever since David came into my life in 2021, and for all that he got me into, to the Steam Rally events, Tinker's Park Rally included, classic car shows, historic commercial vehicle events, increased bus rallies and all that, and all the rest of it, and how it really helped me eventually, finally overcome the loss and the worst of the grief from my grandfather's death, and alongside the 3 other troubling circumstances I was dealing with. You know, I have a lot to be thankful towards David. I have a lot to be thankful for. And my advice, what I would say, if you know anybody who is struggling with grief, one thing I would always recommend is help them whatever way you can. You know, because there's no reason one who's suffering from either a crippled or certainly a complicated grief, there's no reason they should feel alone. There's completely no reason they should feel alone. I mean, really, there's no reason. And if it really does, of course, significantly curtail their life, one thing would be recommending therapy, certainly talking therapies to describe how it's made them feel so that they can get their life back on track, you know, and so forth. So, yes, we meet those that are meant to help us when we need them. David, he really was one of them. And that's why I'm fortunate, and I do not take for granted the friendship we have. I'm extremely thankful for David. David looks a bit like my late grandfather Edmund. David actually, he reminds me of Edmund. You know, he doesn't look exactly like Edmund, but he looks very similar to him. You know, he's short like that of how Edmund was. The only difference was he's not skinny and petite like that of how Edmund was. David, I mean, he's a medium sort of slim build. He's a medium slim. He's a bit bigger than I. We used to be about the same weight, but he actually, when I first met him, he actually weighed more than what I did. But sadly, that was his undoing, having increased weight, because he had high cholesterol. And once he had the high cholesterol, he went on a diet and shed a lot of weight. And nowadays, he tries not to go too much over 155, 156 pounds. Well, during last year, he was 155, 156 pounds and 5'4.5". Edmund, he never got to that weight. He never got to 155, 156 pounds. I'm 153 pounds. So David weighs a little more than I, but he's shorter. Hello, Blacksmith. It'll be watchable on replay, just to say. I've been back on track emotionally since 2023. It took time. It did take time after what I'd gone through. You know, so yes. And also, I remember Pamela asking, I've actually got a tape of his voice, and you'll be able to hear what he sounded like. Sometimes I even hear his voice talking. I'm never going to forget his voice, never. I'll try not to get in tears when I play this. I'll play the tape of his voice, what he sounded like. Okay. What's going on? Oh dear.
We'll go along.
No, sorry, there we are. Okay, listen closely.
I think we'll go along. We'll go along to the fort, I think, if that's all right.
That was his voice. That was Edmund's voice. That was what he sounded like when he spoke. That was his voice. I've got the tape. I got archival footage of it, because I know Pamela was curious as to what his voice sounded like. That was his voice. That was his voice. Never, honestly, it's an unforgettable voice he had. Truly unforgettable. You know. So my memories of my wonderful late grandfather, they'll sustain me for a lifetime. I'm happy I've got it. I'm happy I've got it, Jody. Really, I am. So, I really need to play it again. I have to play it again. Sorry if it's played again.
I think we'll go along. We'll go along to the fort, I think, if that's all right.
Never forget that voice. I could never, certainly for a lifetime, never forget that voice. Never. An unforgettable voice. I'm going to have this with me for a lifetime. But as you know, today, to finish this off, you have a video of your son, and that's the most cherished thing I have ever. Oh, wonderful, Jody, wonderful. I have videos of my granddaddy telling me stories of my youth on my YouTube, but they are private. Okay. Sometimes I have very vivid dreams of my loved ones who have died. I still sometimes dream of my grandfather. I still have that at times. And I still have dreams of my grandmother. I mean, well, this was when of the times we spent before, the very sad, really subduing and terrible realization I'd learned, you know. I will talk to you about it, Pamela, because I trust you enough to talk about it to you. Jody knows about it already. Jody knows. You know, so yeah. I still have that tape. My father died that year when I was... My father died that year when I was 4. That was 71 years ago. Oh, wow. Thank you, Jody. Thank you. I think he would be. So yes, that's their way of visiting you. They appear in your dreams. Oh, thank you, Queen Bee. Thank you. So yes, in loving memory of my wonderful late grandfather Edmund. He was the epitome of a true gentleman, through and through. And this is the last part that one of the last things I need to share, that it truly means a lot to me, what was said to me one November 2023 evening with my wonderful friend. I haven't heard from her in a very long time, Michelle Pope. I conversed with her that evening. Oh, my word. It makes me emotional when I look back on it. When she said to me, "You are the epitome of a true gentleman through and through," which I'd like to say is certainly very refreshing in this day and age. I mean, honestly, I was in tears when she said that to me. Honestly, that touched me. You know, hearing that, because there was only one person, there was only one man, and only one man I knew who was the epitome of a true gentleman, and that was nobody other than my wonderful late grandfather Edmund, because he was all of those things, and really, truly all of those things, and I couldn't have ever seen in any other man that I've encountered or known, and to have been considered that in something that I'd seen in someone who I really loved and looked up to heavily as a child, during my childhood and youth. It's very touching. It's truly touching. Your grandfather would be very proud of you following so well in his gentlemanly ways. Thank you, Maxa. Thank you. Your father died 71 years ago. Really, I didn't realize you were elderly, Maxa. I never realized that. There are not enough true gentlemen in this model. I know, yes, I know. Tell me about it. But there is a true gentleman who I could list as an example. Richard E. Grant, he's a true gentleman. A real true, he is truly the epitome of a true gentleman. You know, he has proper gentlemanly ways. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing so with me. So yes, in ode and loving memory to my wonderful late grandfather Edmund. His legacy will never be forgotten under any shape or form whatsoever. The memories I have of my wonderful late grandfather will always sustain me. I'll never take those memories for granted, be it the bus trips we used to take during my childhood, riding in his camper van when he had it, and going on the Isle of Wight steam railway with him, the walks I did with him, and bus trips along the Isle of Wight, or going in the camper van, going to Ventnor on the Isle of Wight with him, or sometimes him and my grandmother. Those are cherished memories that are always, always, always going to sustain me. You know. Oh, thank you, Queen Bee. Thank you. Oh, hello, Aussie Queen Jess. Thank you. But thank you, all of you, for your support since I did this tribute in ode to my wonderful late grandfather Edmund, the epitome of a true gentleman, true and true. He was all those things. And to have been considered that by somebody or anyone, it touches me. It truly touches me, even now to this day. And one of my most cherished things I'm always never going to take for granted is having the picture of him holding me in his arms. And I've got to get this up. I really have to show it. Most of you have already seen this. There's a photograph of me more than 20 years ago with my late grandfather holding me in his arms when I was a toddler. This is a cherished picture. I'm always going to look at that. Always. Always. Oh, Metal's going live. Okay, no trouble at all, Aussie Queen Jess. Certainly no trouble at all, but this is me with my late grandfather. This was around about 2002, 2003. Thank you, Aussie Queen Jess. Thank you. Thank you, Celestial Dances. Thank you. My late grandfather, that was him when he was then visibly aged. He was probably about 56, maybe 57 back then. He does look quite old, I know, but it was poor health. Sadly, the poor health, it aged him, and he didn't age very well as a result of the poor health. And I'd actually found another picture of him to show. If I could show it. This was Edmund, my late grandfather Edmund, with my younger brother Rexy. That's my younger brother Rexy, who was then aged 10. And that was Edmund, my late grandfather, when he was then aged 66. Oh, sorry. And that was on Christmas Day, 2012. That was him. And then 66-year-old, this was before his health really took its toll. But this already in poor health then, this was before thrombocythemia, that was, but he was then age 66. Some might confuse him for being older, well, that's up to them, but that was him as a then 66-year-old man. Christmas Day 2012, when we were having a family Christmas. He really was. He truly was, Leah. My late grandfather Edmund was truly a sweet man in every way. No, sorry. I'm trying to find a... No. No. Got it. Okay. I've actually got a picture of my grandfather's camper van I wanted to show all of you before we finish off. This was my late grandfather's Volkswagen camper van. That was his camper van before it had to go off to scrap. That was what it looked like. And this really would have been a very, very, very good take to a classic car show or an automobile show, or certainly to a show where there'd be classic Volkswagens, classic campers and all that. No, it would have looked very good at a classic car show, this one, or anywhere, or a classic Volkswagen show. Like really, it really would have belonged well at a classic Volkswagen show, something like this, truly, when looking back on it. I certainly agree with you, Celestial Dancers, yes. Thank you, Pamela. Feel you've gotten to know him a bit. Thank you. Thank you. Honestly, Pamela, you would have loved him if you'd met him. No, really, you would have loved him if you'd met him. Yeah. No, he definitely would not have wanted me to mourn him too long, I know. But it wasn't just the complicated grief, but there were other troubling circumstances. 3 more that came after he died. And of course, I know he wouldn't have wanted me to be deep, severely unhappy and, or broken and shattered. I know he would not have wanted that for me. I mean, if it wasn't for David Pommel, I probably would have had to go into therapy or counselling for the troubling circumstances, and probably have to go into have treatment for alcoholism, because the way I was drinking to excess, if that carried on long term, that would have almost, I'm certain, it would have turned into alcoholism. But I'm so glad it never got to that point. Thank goodness. Thank you, Aussie Queen Jess. Thank you. So yes, thank you for watching this tribute to my wonderful late grandfather Edmund. His very captivated spirit and memory will never in a lifetime be forgotten. by me. It will never be forgotten. In ode to his memory and legacy, it will always, the memories I have of my wonderful late grandfather Edmund will sustain me. And the memories of when he used to talk to me about his childhood, his days working in architecture. And there's one more funny story. During the summer of 1976, that hot summer of 1976, he was working on an architectural drawing, and then a drip of sweat was just dripped from his forehead, fell on the paper, and it just messed up the drawing. What a story. Oh my word, what a story. I'll never forget that. You know, and he will always be remembered for his kindness, his friendliness, his pleasance, and his unforgettable gentlemanly ways. They will never, never be forgotten in any shape or any form. And my memories of him will cease to die. They will be with me until my very last day. And thank you, Edmund. Thank you for the wonderful memories that have sustained me and probably shaped me for who I am now today. And I know, and I do know, had you met David, I can only just imagine both of you getting on so well. Or if you'd met, say, Pamela or Jodie, Andrea, Aussie Queen Jess, Queen Bee, or any of my supporters, Leah, Anne, Celestial Dancers, I can tell you they would all absolutely love you. They would certainly love you. Thanks and hugs to you always, darling Pamela. All would very, very much like you, and I can't emphasize that more strongly enough. In loving memory of my wonderful late grandfather Edmund, who was born on the 17th of October, 1946, and died on the 18th of February, 2020, aged 73. And this year, the 17th of October 2026 will be quite significant. It will mark his 80th birthday, his 80th heavenly birthday. Because if he was still alive, on the 17th of October 2026, it would have marked his 80th birthday. And that day, I'm thinking seriously of visiting his childhood hometown. And from 2027, the weekend after the anniversary of his death, I'm seriously thinking of visiting his childhood town of Woolston annually. I should have done this sooner, but I'm going to do it soon. And I'm seriously thinking of planning it. Oh no, Andrea, I never meant to make you have tears in your eyes and cry. Oh, I just want to hug you, darling. In loving memory of my wonderful grandfather, always will I be thankful for the wonderful memories. Thank you very, very much for watching, everybody. In ode to my wonderful late grandfather Edmund, the epitome of a true gentleman, who will never, never be forgotten. Thanks, Queen Bee. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for watching. And I shall see you in the very next live stream on Friday, 20th of February, 2026. And it shall be more cheerful and upbeat, because today was in ode and remembrance to my grandfather. Thank you very, very much for watching, and thank you, mods. Ta-ta for now.